Hello. Dr. Cindy Russell is co-chair of the Santa Clara County Medical Association Environmental Health Committee, executive director of Physicians for Safe Technology, and in her spare time, a plastic surgeon practicing in Mountain View, California. Dr. Russell is here with us today to talk about the water pollution aspects of artificial turf. She penned one of the best advocacy letters I've seen ever. It was 18 pages total, with 12 pages of peer review articles on all the public health aspects and social costs of artificial turf, the serious water pollution, the heat islands, the potable water usage, the high incidence of knee and ankle injuries and concussions. Everything was in there. It apparently didn't get fully read by the people intended, but I certainly appreciated it. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Cindy Russell.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for having me speak today. I became involved in, initially, I'm going to talk today about artificial turf, and I'm going to give you some background on chemicals. And I became involved in this as a breast reconstructive surgeon and witnessing the epidemic of breast cancer and wondering why, and then finding the connection between chemicals in the environment and toxins that are stored in the breast milk. So I also worked on policy through the CMA, California Medical Association, and our local county medical association, and also worked on a pesticide ordinance to reduce pesticides in Santa Clara County. So I'm gonna talk a bit about, I'm gonna go ahead and start now. Sorry. We all know water is life, and we all depend upon it and all the creatures of the earth. This is a good quote that I wanted to start with by Charles Johnson, Assistant Surgeon General of the United States during the Nixon era. And he reminds us that everything we put into the water, we need to remove it before drinking it, if it's toxic. We all understand that there's a water crisis and water scarcity. Climate change is changing all of the distribution of water. Floods in one area, you've got drought in the other. We know there's a lot of pollution. We're going to talk a little bit about that in terms of water quality. And we also know that industry uses a lot of water. And all of these industries not only use water, but as they use water, they tend to pollute the water that we have to clean up later. One use of large amounts of water that's becoming apparent now to more people is that of AI. And one Bitcoin transaction uses about the same amount of water as 11 households. One data center uses 300 to 500,000 gallons of fresh water a day. They can't, they have to use fresh water in some of these areas. So we're using a lot of water, and we need to learn how to protect it and to conserve it. There is widespread water deterioration. We know this. Lakes and streams are polluted. We have chemical contaminants. Some are regulated, but as we're going to see, not a lot of them are regulated, not enough of them. And this quote by Richard Demania, I think speaks well to that it doesn't matter where you live in the world, your water is going to be pretty much polluted. There's not very many places in the world where it's not. And it's also an invisible threat to our economy. Chemical pollution has now crossed the planetary boundaries. We know there's just a lot of chemicals that are being produced. Around 80,000 are being produced. We have 700 chemicals in humans now that were never found in our great-grandparents. And researchers are telling us that our babies are pre-polluted. It's interesting to note that in the US, we've only restricted or banned about 14 chemicals. Europe has banned 1,300. They are on track to do a lot more as they look at not a single chemical at a time, but they're looking at classes of chemicals to try to ban. And it's a very difficult process, but they're working on it now. We will keep our fingers crossed that that works. And we can maybe use that information for us to help us in preventing pollution. So we look at chemical regulation. There's just a laundry list here of all of the chemical regulations for water. It's not every single one, but these are the major ones that started. And they started really in 1948 because rivers were on fire. There's human waste in the rivers and litter everywhere. And so the Clean Water Act came in 1972. An interesting thing was Nixon was in power. He was president at that time, and he vetoed this act because it was too expensive at $24 billion. But the Congress came together, and it became a bipartisan effort to override the veto in both the House and the Senate. So it's the most comprehensive act in the nation's history. And then the Safe Drinking Water Act followed, and the Toxic Substance Control Act followed. And there are problems with each of these regulations because with TSCA, about 62,000 chemicals were grandfathered in. It doesn't have the complete list of chemicals that need to be addressed. And an update to that in 2016 was better that Obama signed. However, there's still criticism of it because it still forced the EPA to consider the economic cost of regulation to the extent practicable. And that was the key words. And the Endocrine Society said the typical cost-benefit analysis focused on the costs of regulation to manufacturers, but they really didn't focus on the harms to human health. So there's still a lot of problems with these, even despite all of this regulation. We really still have a lot of pollution that it basically is really almost an unsolvable problem, but we're going to still try to solve it. Another problem with chemicals are that you have regrettable substitutes. It's a whack-a-mole situation where you have one chemical that's banned, say flame retardants in California. They ban a certain chemical like polybrominated diphenyl ethers, and then they replace it with another chemical. BPA is the same, PFAS is the same. All these chemicals, though, that are substituted, they have unknown health hazards, or they can still be persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic to the environment. Contaminants of emerging concern. This is our chemicals of convenience have given us all of these chemicals of concern that will continue to be concerning years and years later as we try to study it. And it is really an effort to try to ban these. And not that the EPA doesn't try, but it's a very difficult process. And we have some of them that are that we haven't studied and we need a lot more study on, but as you see, it's a difficult problem. Where do these come from? They come from either point sources of pollution, and you can point at those, and you can see there's the animal farms, that you've got electronics, fracking, all of these point sources of pollution that can be regulated to some degree, and although there's exemptions. And then there's non-point sources of pollution. That's everything else we put in the water. Even the rainwater now has got about 15 different PFASs in the rainwater, and pesticides and other things. Stormwater, of course, we know about. Pet flea control products, we wash our dog, those all go down the drain. We have microplastics are the newest of these emerging. There's also novel non-source pollution and non-source pollution, and those are byproducts of manufacturing. In one case, this plastic manufacturing plant, they added fluorine gas to stabilize the plastic, and it wound up causing PFAS. Also, products of degradation. We know DDT can be degraded into DDE, and that can be in certain ways even more toxic than DDT. Hexachromium 6 still in the U.S. waters. Most everybody's seen Erin Brockovich, and yet, despite the fact that she worked so hard on it, there was a lot that was done, but it's still produced. There's still toxic waste all over. It's hard to clean these chemicals up once they're released into the environment. Now we're going to talk about artificial turf. Artificial turf was introduced in 1965, and everybody thought it was the best thing since 7-Up. It's an old saying, but it didn't require much maintenance. They said no maintenance. You don't have to water it. It's going to be cheaper in the long run. And that has not turned out to be what has really happened. It's now recognized as a global problem because it has toxic pollution. There's water contamination. It does need to be maintained. You have to put infill in every year, every other year. It creates urban heat island effects, and it's a huge disposal issue. And each artificial turf weighs about 200 to 400,000 pounds. It only lasts about 8 years. And then where do you put it? That's a huge problem. And there's, yes. So what is it made out of? Artificial turf is made out of these plastic blades, which are typically polypropylene or nylon. And they have a backing that's plastic, and the infill is variable. It for many years and is still most commonly crumb rubber, crushed tires. But now they're trying to have various and sundry other infills for this, which are coconut husks and other, quote, natural products. However, they have to coat them, and there's still plasticizer and UV colorant, UV stabilizers in them, and so forth. And to keep in mind, it's a petroleum-based product, and there's a carbon footprint. I didn't add those slides in. Chemicals that are found in artificial turf are many. It's a potpourri of chemicals that have biological effects, or known carcinogens, neurotoxicants, mutagens, endocrine disruptors. There's a lot of things that are required to go into artificial turf. The Department of Toxic Substances Control has done some background documentation on these candidate chemicals, and you can see here, this is only a short list. I mean, they're chemical classes, but there are a lot of chemicals, heavy metals, and so forth. PFAS, or forever chemicals, that everybody knows about now. They were developed in the 1950s. They're in a lot of consumer products, your Teflon pans. They're in rain jackets. They're in dental floss. And, you know, I recently found out they are in some shampoos. It makes your hair nice and shiny. And however, and the reason that they're bad is because they have a tight fluorine blonde, and they resist degradation, so they can be in the environment for a very long time. They bioaccumulate in the body. They have a lot of adverse health effects that are being found now, especially in animals: endocrine disruption, toxicity to liver and thyroid, and immune toxicity, developmental harm. Dr. Grandjean did a research study on PFAS in 5-year-olds and found that those kids who had the highest levels of PFAS, they had a lower rate of effectiveness of vaccines that were given. Microplastics are now an emerging contaminant. It's on everybody's mind. There are microplastics that are less than 5 millimeters long. They're a breakdown product of the larger plastics. And of course, it's the most prevalent type of marine debris. It's toxic in very many ways in terms of reproduction and so forth, development to aquatic life. And they're also inflammatory. And now and in the news, you'll hear just more articles about the microplastics that are found in our bodies. They're found in basically every organ. And recently an article came out looking at people who had what's called carotid endarterectomies, where they clean out the calcium plaques in the arteries, and they found that 58% had visible jagged edge foreign particles that were basically polyethylene and could contribute to vascular inflammation. And artificial turf uses that. So they're contaminants of environmental concern. So Dr. Dehaan did a study in 2023 on water contaminants from artificial turf. I think it's the first one that really examined this in depth. And he was from Spain. He looked at rivers in Spain. He looked at estuaries where the water would come out into the ocean, and did many, many studies. It's a very well done studies. They had lots of data. They found that about 50% of the urban waterways had artificial turf, and that about 15% of all the plastic was artificial turf derived. So he has concluded it is a major source of plastic pollution to aquatic environments. And you can see here how that happens. So one of the effects of artificial turf is that it has what's called a heat island effect. Natural grass has water, it evaporates. As it evaporates, it cools. And that's why it's much cooler to be on grass than artificial turf. Artificial turf can absorb the heat. It can get 35 to 60 degrees hotter than a natural grass surface. It's hotter than cement. It's hotter than asphalt. And it is a threat in terms of kids to have, heat sports injuries and heat stroke. So as we are going forward, we see that the planet is heating up. One of the major arguments for artificial turf is playability. So they say, well, you can play anytime, anywhere, rain, snow, and so forth. However, they're not necessarily taking into account the playability on really hot days when it's really dangerous. And the guidelines are really not set. They don't really have any good national guidelines for athletes in terms of really measuring the surface temperature and advising the playability. And they don't really have any surveys of playability in terms of the heat aspect of this. So I think it's going to be predictable that the playing times will diminish if they aren't already. And I don't think that this is a valid argument necessarily for continuing to use artificial turf. So this shows, this is a Twin Creeks Sports Complex in Sunnyvale, California. And this is a good indication. As you can see on the right side, you can see on the left side, you see the Twin Creeks Sports Complex here in the green and the right upper corner. And then if you go ahead and look over at this heat map in the same area, you can see that that is really hot compared to the surrounding areas. So it's a good visual in terms of how this creates such an urban heat island effect. And to note that if you have artificial turf near your house, you can increase your ambient temperature around your house as well. And in urban areas, because of the lack of green space, it can actually heat up urban areas 4 degrees or more. One of the other arguments for using artificial turf over grass is that they say that there's much less water use if you're using artificial turf. One of the main issues that I learned about this early on was that you really can't use recycled water on artificial turf because the salts are harmful to the blades. It breaks down the blades of grass quicker. So they need to use potable water. But there's also some other good studies that have shown that when you're manufacturing artificial turf, to manufacture one artificial turf, you use about 4 years worth of watering a typical grass field. So right, even before the artificial turf hits the field, it's already used a lot of water. And there's water that's needed to cool it down. I went to a Seattle soccer game last year, and the entire time, it was in the summertime, and the entire halftime was spent watering the artificial turf. They had a dog playing frisbee, and that was the entertainment. But it uses about 5,000 to 10,000 liters for one application, which is a lot of water. And a study by Conan in 2020 showed if you want to keep the artificial turf the same temperature as grass, you have to use the same amount of water as grass. So, all right. And so industry says, well, we need to cool the turf. How are we going to do it? There's all these different kinds of new infill that they can use and different methods to do this. And as you can see here, patented infill, it's equipped with back shield, captures water, but it's not really proven yet. And so we haven't really seen how this has been effective. or scientifically demonstrated as well. But there have been efforts, unfortunately, not efforts, but there's a lawsuit currently and some prior lawsuits with regards to the inadequacy of this cooling system. So industry is telling us that we need to use it, and they've got all these answers for us, but there's still a lot of questions about really if this is going to work, and also how toxic it is, because you're adding yet another element, another plastic, another infill that's going to wash down the drains. That's going to then be something else that we have to clean up again. And how is it going to affect the fish? How is it going to affect our groundwater? We just don't know. Disposal problems are a huge issue, and currently there's no state or federal regulations for disposing of the artificial grass. And the Synthetic Turf Council really wants you to know that the project owner has the ultimate responsibility of ensuring that the synthetic turf system is recycled, reused, repurposed, or disposed of in a responsible manner. And this has come up again and again when maybe some schools would say, I thought you were going to recycle it. It's recyclable. You said it was recyclable. And then now they're stuck with the artificial turf. And unfortunately, so much of this gets dumped on even farmland back in Pennsylvania and other states. They have, acres, they have a lot of land that has this stored on it, and it's stored in warehouses. And so far, there hasn't really been adequate recycling. And industry does give the perception that it does, but California doesn't recycle fake turf. And in fact, TenCate has launched this synthetic turf recycling program in Texas, and they will supposedly, and they call it advanced recycling, but artificial turf is made up of a mix of a lot of plastics and a lot of chemicals and a lot of infill. It has silica. It can have all these issues, all these chemicals and so forth, and minerals in it that they have to separate, and then they crush it up and they make it into pellets and try to reuse it for something else. The problem is it takes a lot of energy to do that. We haven't really seen that they've really started to do this in any kind of a meaningful way, but they keep promising. And there is a backlog of artificial turf around the country and around the world. And how are they going to do that? So there's a lot of questions about the advanced recycling. And Attorney General Bonta also has a lot of questions about recycling, because he's suing ExxonMobil for deceptive advertising on recyclability of plastic products. And so we're going to see where this goes. But according to the lawsuit, ExxonMobil misled customers to believing that recycling was a viable solution. And this has then kept the plastic industry going, because they say we can recycle it now, don't worry about it, use your plastic bottles, whatever. So we're going to follow that closely. And this is this also relates to the water use. Valley Water used to give rebates for people who put artificial turf in. 2014, there was a drought, and everybody wanted to save water, and everybody jumped on the bandwagon to be for artificial turf for the reason of water conservation. However, after learning about the water contamination issues, the health issues, now they no longer give that rebate, and they state they want to support a healthy watershed with natural landscaping. What do health professionals say about artificial turf? Well, the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai has a position statement, and they state, because of the uncertainty surrounding the safety of these products, that they recommend against installation of the turf. And the Santa Clara County Medical Association has a policy recommending that artificial turf not be used on sports fields, playgrounds, landscaping, residential lawns, or in school, but use natural grass turf instead. And if it is in place, if the turf is in place, then replace it with natural grass. And that is a recent recommendation. Artificial turf bans. There's a lot of people who are really working on artificial turf bans now. The city of Sunnyvale is looking at it. The city of Los Angeles is looking at it. Colorado does have a ban in place. In the Netherlands, the complete bans that are in place currently are in the Netherlands, in Boston, Oak Bluffs, and Martha's Vineyard, sorry about that typo, and in Millbrae, California, they're total bans. With regard to the crumb rubber infill from crushed tires that have a lot of toxic waste, Holland and the European Union have banned that. So it's a really nice to see that the soccer players in the Netherlands are only going to have grass fields. You might know that the NFL players, they are 100% for grass, almost 100%, 94% for grass. Most players prefer grass, and they perceive that because they feel that there's fewer injuries on it. And soccer players feel the ball moves in a different way, a more natural way. So this is a quote from, I believe, the Mount Sinai, that this artificial turf, its entire life cycle is harmful to our environment and our climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. I do just want to point out that in the new year, in January, the county supervisors of Santa Clara are voting on a staff recommendation to ban artificial turf on public land and county land in Santa Clara. And based on a lot of good research that you've overviewed. And so this is a very prescient issue, and looking at that vote carefully, and certainly I will be sending people out opportunities to weigh in on this. And I do hope that the water treatment facilities that have to deal with this, I keep saying this is way beyond disposable wipes. I mean, this is really takes a lot of, well, it would basically, the runoff from these fields would take advanced filtration and reverse osmosis and microfiltering, and there's a lot of, and I don't even know if at that point, if it gets everything, but it's a big issue. And I always talk in terms of social costs, and no one's paying for the runoff, cleaning the runoff on these fields, or no one's paying for all the injuries that are the 56% higher incidence of knee and ankle injuries, pretty much on high school students. So, it's a clear and present danger. So thanks for diving into this.
Well, you're very welcome. And I understand there is some, soccer coaches and some of the players, people like the predictability of the artificial turf. We're looking at the long-term issues, not necessarily the short-term issues, although injuries do appear to be higher on artificial turf. And I think the players themselves would agree with that. So, one of the issues that has come up, it's important to talk about, is that we really do need to have we need more managers who know how to manage organic grass turf well. There are good options for drought resistant turf, natural grass turf that can be used. We don't want to use invasive plants. So that's an issue. You start looking at it and you want to use the right kind, and but we've lost them with the introduction of artificial turf. We've lost a lot of people who used to really know how to manage these fields well, so they don't have the potholes that people complain about. So it's a real need. I know Beyond Pesticides is working on this, and there's some wonderful organically managed fields that are really healthy for the environment. They have deep roots, they save water, they hold water, they sequester carbon. There's so many advantages to natural grass and green spaces, and also for the well-being of the players.
Yes, we've identified a lot of turf growers actually in the Delta, and Delta bluegrass is one of them. where they have a very good program in terms of R&D. They combine winter seed and summer seed, and they do a lot of stuff with root structure. And it's not, you see, the comparison with the old muddy fields is not good. It's kind of like comparing heat pumps to, electric resistance heat, and it's not a valid comparison. So, and as an old-time soccer player, anybody that actually prefers playing on an artificial turf field, I question like where they're coming from. I mean, that's kind of crazy talk. As soon as they get taken down and they have abrasions on both knees, yeah, maybe they can talk after that.
Yeah,
So,
I think all, from what I've heard from people is that they're just concerned about the mole holes and, the maintenance of it. That's really the big
yeah.
issue. So, but
Well,
yeah, everybody likes
there's I think good there's kind of good stories there. Well, thank you once again, and thanks for coming on Waterpalooza.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Dennis. My pleasure.